If you're interested in what I look like in real life and want to learn more about me, then follow my Instagram page at Joe the Insomniak. I have a friend who is a trail ranger, basically a ranger who can't get you into trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders, and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling so well, so he said he was going to head back as this 1-hour ATV ride. The friend finished up the last one when he heard voices. Keep in mind, he's far off the beaten path. He called out and nobody replies. As it was getting dark, he started to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He reconnected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going fast at all. It was actually less than a mile later that it died. He radioed back, basically saying, "Guys, I need someone to come pick me up." They told him that they would be an hour. He asked if the other guy got back, and they said no. He settled down, started a fire, but not long after heard voices again. It's dark, he's not happy. The voices sound like an argument now. Somebody was angry and yelling at someone else who was scared. He called out and said if anyone needs help. The voices didn't seem to care. He guessed it had been less than 1,000 feet away. He radios again, and they said they're having trouble finding what path he might be on and haven't left yet. He asks them to just get the other ranger to tell them about where they are, because he left with the iPad that had the map on it, and they still hadn't got back. About 3 minutes go by. He hears the voices again. He decides to walk to them, hoping maybe they can stop being drunk idiots and maybe have a map. He walked in their direction, but the voice seemed to be getting further as he gets closer. Finally, after 20 minutes, he gave up and walks back. He gets a radio call, and they said the other guy was found passed out, covered in vomit, and was being taken to hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they had found a stand, so they'd have a general idea where he is. The radio died, then the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decides to listen to what they're arguing about and picked up things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take, you better do," and so on. His guess was that the hunters were arguing over a kill. Then he heard something that really shocked him. Then silence. He hears a gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that, he hears nothing. Just his breathing for the next half an hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and find nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was discovered with a long dead man who had clearly been shot in the face. The thing is, it's a skeleton, been there for years. So either the argument he had heard just ended with a bang and both parties went home, or he somehow heard a murder from years ago. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana and Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology, and has to ride out into the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure that there's no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all our gear in saddlebags and started out. The first day and night was amazing. Beautiful scenery, air quality is the finest. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area and wish I could go up there more often. Anyway, we started out on the second day and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" I said yeah, of course. So now she's leading me out to this tiny ravine. We ended up travelling about 2 hours away from our actual path we had laid out on. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing. She tells me to follow this tiny wildlife patch and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those where you can plug it in or wind it up. It also acts as a lantern if you really need it. So I do, and out in the middle of nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out at the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a home. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally, I decided to follow the thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do. Now after coming straight out of the ground, the wire comes across some trees and back to the ground again, snaking around some rocks and finally deadens in an outlet. The outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and wood top, no chair, nothing, just an outlet and a desk. I'm staring confused as hell at this desk in the middle of a forest when my cousin takes a radio, pulls out the cord, plugs it into the outlet. It then lit up and started blaring out static. The wire's being fed from somewhere. Now the place where we are had no road access, no buildings for literally miles on end, and away from everyone. Yet, there's a live power outlet. Weird as hell. I'm an ex-ranger. We had a group of frat boys making way too much noise. We come by twice. And at the second stop, I told them, "This is your last warning. Not only is it rude for other campers to be so loud, it's exceptionally dangerous. Everyone knows that local mountain lions are attracted to noises at night, and these ghost cats, as they're called, can creep right up on you without ever making a sound. I told them whatever you do, don't leave your tent tonight. Don't make another sound." I go back to the station, grab the lion pelt from the interp center and the night vision goggles. Once they're all in their tents, we crept up in the campsite and made fake lion tracks everywhere. I then pull the jeep forward as though we're arriving upon the scene and get out. I turned on my mag light and illuminated the silhouette of the lion pelt. Because I was moving quickly, the shadow of the lion appeared to be moving. At this point, they're losing it. They're screaming there's another one and stay in their tents, and then let's get out of here. At that point, we turned off the flashlights, grabbed the lion pelt in the darkness and jumped in the jeep and sped off. Just after sunrise, they began peeking out of their tents. No one was brave enough to get out of their tents, and when they saw the giant paw prints everywhere, they were screaming. I was a lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho. The nearest town from guard station was about an hour and a half away by car. After moving to the guard station, the solar power was not working. I hadn't slept for about a month due to various factors. There were bats in the cabin. There was something walking on the deck at night. The woods always had an eerie feeling to them. I eventually managed to get used to all this though. Now I'm about 2 months into the seasonal job, and I started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night, perhaps even on the door. Now this district was known for its badgers and beavers, so I don't think much of it. When leaving the cabin at night, I always had an eerie feeling as though I was being watched. One night, I was returning home from my grocery run, and I had a bad feeling. At the time, I didn't have my shotgun in the vehicle. After stepping out of the vehicle, I looked to the right of the cabin, about 50 feet away from my front door. All I see is these two eyes about 4 foot into the air. I yell, "Get the hell out of here," but the eyes only crouch down, getting closer. Now I know it's a large animal. I tossed a piece of firewood in the general area, and the creature leaps back a bit but didn't make a sound. I tossed 4 or 5 more pieces at the creature, yet it inches towards me. At this point, I fumbled with the keys. Of course, the solar power was out again. I managed my way inside, get my shotgun. I went outside. The creature's now a bit closer. Still could not get a good look at it with my crappy headlamp. I loaded the shotgun, continuing to throw wood. Finally, the creature walks back into the brush. That night, I drank about 4 IPAs and slept with my shotgun. In the morning, trail crew came up and we found mountain lion tracks all over the porch. After that, I always heard the rocking chair move and someone or something walking on my porch, but I never found any tracks after this. Considering that it's always muddy up there, I thought it was weird to not find any tracks. Now I've been stalked by mountain lions before and never had that eerie feeling that I did when in those woods. I was 18 years old, a high school senior, and was about 3/4 of the way through the year. I had moved that year and switched to a school about 30 minutes away from where I used to go. I stayed in touch with a few people from my old school and got invited to go camping with a few of them over Memorial Weekend. I invited 2 girls and 1 guy from my new school to come hang out for a night and met them in the closest town from the campsite, about 40 minutes away. The guy Jeremy hopped in the car and the girls followed me up, and we get to the campsite without incident. The campsite was 30 minutes away from any human signs of life outside of a dirt road. The night started off fine with everyone getting completely trashed. At about 12:30, things started to die down as half of us were puking and ready to sleep. Now a lot of the night is still a blur, but I remember climbing into a tent where there's 5 of us in it, 3 guys and 2 girls. It's around 2:30 AM. I was awoken by the sound of a shotgun. I was still very drunk, had a hard time processing anything, but in my drunken state, I figured it as one of the people I was camping with being a dick. One of the guys, Brent, had stayed sober the entire night, and had brought his shotgun up with him, so I figured it as him being a prick to everyone drunk. I check my phone and go back to sleep. I fell asleep at what I think was around 3 AM. I was awoken by somebody bawling their eyes out, and I'm still having a hard time processing anything. After about 5 minutes, I realise it's Brent, and I stumble out of my tent followed by Jeremy. I walk out and see Brent is bleeding profusely from his nose and mouth. I run over to him stumbling. I am then hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious. Everything from this point forward is from Jeremy's point of view. Jeremy to this day is my best friend, and has told me his version of this story many times. He says I passed by a tree and a large man lunges out and smashes my face with a rock. After hitting me, the man lunges at Jeremy, tackling him straight to the ground. Jeremy at the time was 5'8" and 140 pounds, but this guy was 6'4", 280. Jeremy is being choked to death by this monster of a man. He now hears another gunshot. Sarah managed to find a pistol Brent had also brought with him, firing a shot missing the man. It scared him though, and he now rushes off into the woods. They just let him go, and Jeremy drove me and Brent to hospital. I had 3 broken teeth and a severe concussion, and Brent had part of his tongue mutilated with a knife and broken nose. Now Brent has never talked to me or any of my other friends from that trip about exactly what happened. When he was outside alone with that man, refusing to give the police description as well. This man was never caught, and I've never been in that deep forest again. This was in 2005, I should mention. I'm a park warden. I spend most of my shifts alone, working 5:30 PM to 2:30 AM in the Canadian wilderness. We have about 300 campsites, a handful of beaches, and the infrastructure that goes with them. It just so happens that my park is closed during winter, which is a standard thing in Canada. So there's no staff in the park from mid-October to early April. Now years ago, a man decided to end it all via a sawed-off shotgun down by the river on one of the beaches in late November. No one found him until the spring melt. This beach is at the furthest north point of the park. It's pretty isolated, but as it has a beach, it requires at least one patrol an evening. I was down in the showers at the beach at around 7 PM on a very overcast day. I was checking the supplies in the first aid kits and signing off on the fire extinguishers. The weather was blah, so there were no campers out or patrols anywhere near the beach. And the parking lot was empty except for my cruiser. All of a sudden, a feeling of intense panic washes over me. I booked it to my cruiser, get in, slam the door shut and take a few deep breaths in and wait for the feeling to pass. After a minute or two, I get back to business, but this time sitting in my locked car, filling out blinders and work logs. Suddenly, a huge dark shape moves across my driver's side window and I scream and jump back. My immediate thought is that somebody's been lurking and was about to try and smash the glass door open. Sure as hell it is empty, not a soul around, but you can bet your life enough that I left all the further maintenance tasks on the neck of the park patrol doing it in the day shift. I floored it out of there. Now, it's not probably the scariest or most shocking story, but it rattled me hard, and now I refuse to do foot patrols down there at night. I was somewhat popular at the time. I had around 4 very close friends: Rose, Lynn, Noah, and Zach. These were the main ones. Now, we went out on many adventures around that time: camping, road trips, the beach. Noah's family was pretty wealthy, and all of our families were pretty lenient with rules. One day, the summer before 8th grade, we went on a camping trip with Lynn's older sister, Margaret, and Zach's older brother, Todd. So there's 7 of us: Lynn, Zach, and I was the 13th. Noah and Rose were the 14th. Margaret and Todd were both 17. We decided to go camping in a nearby forest, around 20 miles from Noah's home. It's pretty much the middle of nowhere. Noah's house and his neighbours were the closest homes. There were no signals for phones or any other electronics out there. We get to the spot easily without problems, and we make camp. The girls in one tent and the boys in another. Maybe it's a bad idea to have 17s, 13 to 16, with no phones in the woods. But our parents are lenient, like I said, and confident we should be fine since the woods were not known for anything dangerous or bad. So we get set up, go swimming by a nearby lake, come back and make dinner over a fire about 20 feet away from the tent, which are about 4 feet away from each other. We have s'mores and do all those stupid camping things before Lynn and Margaret decide they're gonna sleep. They left Todd, Rose, and Noah and Zach and I joking around telling scary stories. Then Margaret wakes up annoyed and tells us that whoever is messing with the side of the tent to stop. Keep in mind, no one's left the group, and the tents were far enough away from each other to not have anyone near them. She explains that somebody keeps touching the side of the tent, running something along it. We dismiss her. Todd states it's probably a tree branch, and Rose and I decide to sleep as well. So we head back to the tent. Lynn is asleep, and we settle in. Me closest to the opening, Margaret next to Lynn, who is at the opposite side of the tent, and Rose in between Margaret and I. I manage to fall asleep easily within 5 minutes until I wake up suddenly, for what seems like no reason. I now go and check on my phone. I still brought it, and it had a portable charger that was just to take pictures, and it's literally the middle of the night. At 2:15, I look around. My eyes are getting adjusted to the darkness, trying to figure out why I'm awake. A tapping sound on the tent was the first thing I noticed, and a soft giggle. It sounded somewhat deep, like a male voice, but I couldn't be sure. Now, after what felt like an hour, it was probably a minute or two, the tapping and giggling stops. I was convinced it's my imagination, or maybe one of the boys trying to prank us, or even a tree branch like Todd suggested earlier. Telling myself it was a tree branch and lack of sleep. I fell asleep until Rose woke up at around dawn. She also woke me. Everyone's awake, and we decided to hike a little. We decided to go into 2 groups because we planned on spending the night again, and we didn't want anyone messing with our stuff. Even though these woods weren't popular with camping, we didn't want to risk it. Now Margaret, Lynn, Rose and I left to go hiking for a couple of hours, while the boys opted to stay behind and fish, swim and cook. We hiked for about 2 hours, and when we came back, the boys are not at the campsite. Now we're annoyed. Margaret went down to the lake with Lynn to find them. Rose and I made our way back to the tents, and I'll be honest and say I screamed and almost wet myself. The tents are slashed. I inspect it closer after regaining composure before I was usually the more collective one of the two. It seemed to be made with a knife. Our tents were made of a pretty thin material but it's very hard to cut into, so effort would have had to been there. The boys, Margaret and Lynn, came running up to our screams and were obviously startled. We decided to pack up and head home early because, for one, the tents were ripped too much to use again comfortably, and we're very scared. Even more so when Todd announces that his tyres are slashed. We're all freaking out, obviously. There was no cell service. Todd's tyres were slashed. And there was no way any of us wanted to stay any longer. Luckily, Todd reported that Margaret's tyres looked fine, and she noticed that she could then take Noah and Lynn, drop them off to call 911 and call their parents, and come back for us. She drove a car, and there wasn't enough room for more than 3 people as the back's filled up with the camping gear. So now, it's Zach, Todd, Rose and I left at the camping grounds. We decided to begin a hike back towards the main road, so Margaret wouldn't have to drive so far. Also, Rose and I refused to stay anywhere near the camping area, so we began hiking. My phone died. The last time I looked at it, it was 1 in the afternoon. Zach and Rose both had working phones and constantly updated us on how far we had been walking. I began to hear branches snapping from behind us, closer to the trees than we walked. And I got more and more paranoid as time went on. I told Todd. He seemed to get much more wary of the surroundings, constantly looking over his shoulder. We had been walking for about 30 minutes. Margaret was probably at Noah's house or almost there when Todd screamed run. Naturally, I looked behind my shoulder before running. There's 3 hooded figures running towards us. 2 had knives, and they're all at least 6'3" or so. Todd was 6'1", but I strongly doubted he could defend us against them. Even though it's broad daylight, I couldn't make out any facial features. Now they're all over 200 pounds. The shortest one was probably 6'2", but they all had masks on. We began running, and 3 of the guys finally gave up and decided we weren't worth terrorizing or capturing because we lost them. We make it back to the main road where we waited, walking quickly, constantly looking over shoulders in fear until Margaret arrived. We told the police everything. They searched the woods nearby and never found any evidence what we had been talking about, or even that we had been there. Now I really don't know what would have happened if they caught us. I'm fairly tall, around 5'10" during this time, but only 125 pounds. Rose is a lot smaller though, about 5'1", and Zach was barely 5'9" at the time. Now I'm so thankful that I told Todd about them, I have no doubt they would have been able to catch us if he hadn't been looking over his shoulder constantly. I'm so glad they never caught us to do God knows what. It's obvious they intended to harm us. How badly? I don't ever want to know.